I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday, November 14th. Coming up on Chicago Tonight, one-on-one with outgoing Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson, a controversial apology from a university editorial board, and previewing Bears versus Rams. But first, Illinois legislators are done meeting for the year. Their veto session adjourned just a couple of hours ago. For more on what they did and what they didn't do, we go live to Springfield with Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicky, who brings us some news about a very high-profile lawmaker. Amanda, what's the latest?
Yes, Paris, sources do confirm to us that Senate President John Cullerton is stepping down. He will do this in January before the new legislative session really gets underway. Cullerton is a longtime figure here in Springfield. He's been in the General Assembly since he was elected actually to the Illinois House in 1978, and he's been Senate President for the past decade. He's prided himself in that position on allowing rank and file senators to have a lot of say in what the chamber does in bipartisanship, working through the budget impasse and trying to come up with the solution that finally got Illinois a budget. So why is he leaving midterm? We are waiting on a statement from him, but our sources tell us that he told senators, that is, that he wanted to spend more time with his family. This, however, does come as the Senate is under scrutiny, or at least some senators anyway. You had in September the FBI raid the offices of Senate Democrat Martin Sandoval and also a distant cousin of President Cullerton. This is State Senator Tom Cullerton. He's fighting embezzlement charges.
All right, so much more to come on this in the coming days. Amanda, as to the legislative action, how did things go for Mayor Lightfoot and some of the things that she was asking for down there?
Paris, this was a disappointing session for Mayor Lightfoot, to be sure. She had two big asks of the General Assembly, and she came away with neither of them. Not on approval for the city to enact a graduated tax on real estate transfers, also not on a revised tax structure for a Chicago casino. This even after on Tuesday she had visited Springfield to lobby senators. She had been up front in October when she unveiled her budget plan that she was going to need the state's help to fill that $838 million budget hole.
We will need cooperation from Springfield in order to get this done. As everyone here knows, we have spoken at length to the governor and his team, legislative leaders and other lawmakers, business groups and other organizations about our need for Springfield to support a Chicago casino.
So what happened with all this?
Paris, it had been clear for a while that that real estate transfer tax was going to be tied up in a no-go, but there had been a big push to get this Chicago casino fix underway. You had an independent study say that the tax structure set up in the law authorizing the casino would make tax rates so high that no business was going to want to come to the city to try to operate a casino there. In other words, unless the legislature made any changes, there would be no Chicago casino, and without a Chicago casino, no revenue to go into the city's underfunded police and fire pension systems. Also, no money for the state, or at least no money from the Chicago casino to go toward infrastructure projects. Now, for a while today, it had seemed that there was a lot of momentum and that there was a chance it was going to get through, but then late this afternoon, early evening even, that fizzled out. Apparently, not enough votes. Chicago lawmakers were upset.
The Chicago members took the vote that didn't help our police and fire on the promise that they would be made whole later. We took a leap of faith.
How are we going to move forward with a Chicago casino in a way that takes care of our first responders and their pension needs, like we did the downstate police and fire pension needs, and fund the capital projects?
As for that earlier question, why did this not go through? There are really a bunch of reasons. It was a difficult push to get the gambling expansion law passed in the first place. That was a law that didn't just give Chicago a casino, there were others as well. So then when you reopen a controversial measure like this, it's sort of like opening to use a cliche, a Pandora's box, that you had a lot of legislators wanting something out of it. Those from DuPage, for example, wanting money to go back to their county's health system. Those working working on a deal say that the request just got to be too much, too weighed down, too unwieldy. Some lawmakers from outside of Chicago, that is, saw this as the city wanting to get better treatment than the rest of the state. And while Lightfoot's team, I saw them, they were clearly very busy working to build support for this. Some lawmakers say it wasn't enough.
I was identified as the point person for the House Republican Caucus a year and a half ago on gaming issues. And throughout this whole thing, since the spring session, the city of Chicago has not approached me once. Not a phone call, not an email, not a meeting to talk about the Chicago casino.
In a statement, the mayor said that she is going to continue to work for a fix. Quote, while this delay does not impact the city's fiscal year 2020 budget, this fiscal challenge looms large for the next fiscal year and thereafter. I look forward to continuing our conversations about advancing the casino starting in January. With so much potential on the line, our city and state deserve to get this done and get this done right. Again, it is not just the city that needs a Chicago casino to come through. The state is expecting to bring in some $200 million or so annually to pay for those infrastructure projects from the Chicago casino.
All right, Amanda, we talked about what didn't happen. How about what did happen?
This is some of what those Chicago lawmakers you just heard were hinting at. A pension measure. This is one that is backed by the governor. So yes, he will sign it into law, past both chambers of the General Assembly. This is going to fold some 650 downstate and suburban police and fire pension funds into just 2. The governor says that this is going to bring down costs, and that means savings for taxpayers.
Your local property taxes are significantly being affected and raised in many cases because you've got to deal with local fire and police pensions to make sure that you're bringing them up to appropriate funding status. What we've done here is to allow the markets to help fund these funds.
Lawmakers also took initial steps in light of that ever-widening corruption probe and federal investigations that are ongoing. For example, passing a measure that is going to create a commission that will give advice on more ethics measures that the General Assembly should enact. Also, some minor changes that will require more disclosure from lobbyists. Now, Democrats say that this is just a first step. They point to that commission that is going to continue to make recommendations on the ethics front. But Republicans say that this was milquetoast, window dressing, and given this cloud of corruption over the Capitol, that legislators most definitely should have done more. Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. And up next, we sit down with Chicago's top cops, so stay with us.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by North Shore University Health System.
Here's to the end of illness and the beginning of how healthcare should be. At North Shore, we're transforming your healthcare by analyzing your DNA to identify future health risks for you and working to stop illness before it begins. When you're a North Shore patient, your advanced primary care physician makes the latest genetic science part of your everyday care to keep you healthier longer. Advanced Primary Care. Here's to taking control of your health and taking on what's next.
WTTW's digital series Firsthand Gun Violence explores the toll Chicago's gun violence takes on residents. All this week on Chicago Tonight, we've featured residents, community leaders, and elected officials to discuss how violence has impacted their daily lives and work. Joining us now is someone who experienced gun violence as a kid growing up in public housing. It led him to a 31-year career in the Chicago Police Department, and in December, he will retire after nearly 4 years as Chicago's Superintendent of Police. We speak, of course, of Eddie Johnson. Superintendent Johnson, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thanks, Paris. Thanks for having me.
So all week we've been featuring these on-the-ground, first-hand accounts of gun violence. Becoming a cop was personal for you because you grew up in Cabrini Green, and there's a specific story you have with your father. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, one night a couple of people had gotten killed outside of we lived at 1159 North Larrabee. A couple of people had gotten killed out there that night, and it was maybe about 11:30. And so we were all at the window. We lived on the 10th floor. So we're all, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I are looking down to see what was going on. He had on his pajamas and a bathrobe. So he went downstairs to actually see what was going on. So we're watching as this is going on. So of course the police are out there, and a lot of other people are onlooking. And the next thing we know, a lot of police wagons came to the scene, and they just started arresting everyone, including my dad, you know, and we could see them jostling him, but it was obvious this guy wasn't involved in anything. He was in his pajamas and bathrobe, but they arrested him nonetheless. And for my brother and I, you know, that was a traumatizing experience, to say the least. That's why I'm so acutely aware of when we go into homes and we have to arrest people. You know, I prefer that we try not to do it in front of children. But anyway, you know, so my dad was there, I think overnight, but by the time we woke up that next morning, he was at home. And my parents did a great job at trying to explain to us not to be angry with the police. You know, and so they could have chosen to leave that bad taste in our mouth, but they didn't.
And you know, we've heard so many accounts this week of the trauma of living with gun violence or experiencing something that you did. So how did you deal with that?
You know what? We dealt with it because my parents were that anchor, and they continued on past that night and explaining things to us. So when we lived over there, you know, that's why I push back on the notion when I hear people say black people don't want the police in their neighborhoods. That's not true. What they want is for the police to be fair and respectful, and I know that from living in Cabrini Green, because I give you an example. When we would see, let's say, Officer Williams come around the corner, all of us we would flee because we knew this guy was abusive, and he was. You know, but when we would see O'Shaughnessy come around the corner, everybody would flock to him because he treated us like people. You know, so it's important for people to know, yeah, the police department has some bad actors. We do, just like any other organization. But the majority of cops out there are good. And my parents, they taught us how to act when the police stopped us for any reason. You know, but they never taught us to just to dislike the police. They never taught us that.
Is that lesson resonating with police now, given, you know, when you took over after Laquan McDonald, there was such a distrust between the community and the police?
It was. Yeah, I think, listen, one of the reasons we've been able to reduce the crime these last 3 years is because community partners are working with the police. It's just not about the police. We can't police our way out of this. You'll never arrest your way out of it. So the community has to have the faith and the trust in the police. You always hear me say, CPD is only as strong as the faith that the community has in us. And I think them coming back to us, you know, look at some of the activists that just railed against us in 2016. And now they partner with us to get things to where we want them. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, a safe city that we can all prosper and live in.
Well, are there more officers now that understand how impactful it is that you treat people like human beings, and all of a sudden you'll get buy-in?
Yeah, you know what, Paris, one of the things that we did when I became superintendent, and thanks to Robin Robinson, she really pushed me in this direction, but we started taking all of our recruits to DuSable Museum so they could understand the black plight in the city of Chicago and how the distrust came about. And I think when you give them those lessons, it reinforces to them that, hey, wait a minute, maybe these people do have a valid point, so let me not do that. So I think that was one of the best things we did. And the use of force training, the sanctity of life and de-escalation, I think has been huge. Because I've said it now, I was kind of hesitant to put this stat out there, but in 2011, in the last 10 years, that was our worst year in the last 10 years in terms of use of force incidents against the public. We had like 91 incidents on November 14th of 2011. Now today, fast forward to 2019, we've only had 16 use of force incidents for the year. And 3 of those were off-duty cops who were all 3 victims of attempt carjackings. So 13 on-duty use of force events, and that's phenomenal. And it's because of, I think, the relationships we've built, letting the officers see what they have to deal with when they go into different communities, and the training and the accountability, I think, have all contributed to that reduction.
On the other side of that, you might have police officers or the FOP say they feel hamstrung now with this new focus on a consent decree and more humane policing, and they feel like they can't do their jobs. They're going to be watched on camera 24/7. So how do you get police officers to still feel confident about going out there in the middle of a violent situation?
You know what? The way you do that, Paris, is you have to show them that you have their backs when they're right or they make a mistake. If it's egregious behavior or intentional misconduct, that's one thing. But I think that the body-worn cameras now, most cops on the street will tell you they won't go out on the street without it because it helps tell their side of the story, which we didn't have that before. We always had citizens videotaping cops to see what they were doing, but we were never able to show what they were doing. So I think that that's given them some confidence. You know, all the resources and tools that we've given them over the past 3 years, you know, the promotions. You can't tell cops that you have their back. You have to show it. And you show it by giving them the resources, the tools, and the training. And I think they get it now.
You've been big on community policing. This year, the mayor has actually cut the community policing budget a little bit and cut some positions out of there. Is that a mixed message there?
Well, the positions that were cut were vacant positions that weren't being utilized anyway. And then we shuffled some things around. So, no, I don't think it's a mixed message. I think we have to be efficient in the way that we use our resources and do it in a way that it is actually impactful. And I think we're doing that. Now, are we where we want to be? No. So there's more work to be done. But I'm confident that that work will continue well after I'm gone.
Yesterday we had the U.S. Attorney John Lausch on here saying that federal gun cases are up 50% this year. How helpful has that been to have more federal focus on gun violence?
It's been extremely helpful, you know, because listen, we have to treat gun offenders and people that perpetrate violent crimes differently. We just do. And the fact that John Lausch has been really, really supportive and taking all these gun cases, what that's telling people that perpetrate that gun crime, yeah, if you get convicted, you might not be in the state of Illinois when you get housed.
Were the feds just not taking these cases 2, 3, 4 years ago?
They were taking them, but not at this pace, you know. So we weren't getting the bang for our buck that we probably could have, and I'm not criticizing anyone. They just weren't taking them for whatever reason. But John Lausch is taking a lot more. And I point to, remember a couple years ago, we were having a huge problem with carjackings. So we put together an internal task force in CPD, but then we also put it together external with our federal partners. John Lausch started taking some of those carjackings federal, and what happened with the carjacking cases? They came down, you know. So it's an all hands on deck, you know, approach to it, and I think it's working.
It's an all hands on deck approach with the new interim police chief, Charlie Beck. Why did the mayor choose to go this route by bringing in an outsider for the interim instead of waiting for you and then getting a permanent replacement?
Well, you know, I think that's a question that she's better suited to answer why she actually made that decision. But listen, I've known Charlie Beck for several years, and what I can tell you is this. In 2016, when we were in the midst of a huge crime spike, not too many chiefs around the country wanted to talk to us about what we were doing about crime. Charlie Beck was one of the first people to reach out to me, and he offered up any resources he could. And he ultimately loaned his chief of staff so we could work on our strategic decision support centers. And I'll be eternally grateful for that because that's been a contributing factor in terms of reducing the crime. But there's probably only 3 chiefs in the country that would have loaned personnel like that. And he hired 2 of them. Now, who that third one is, I don't know. But he's aware of the crime issues in Chicago. So, you know, listen, his job is to get CPD from me to that next person over the 2 or 3 months that he's here.
And there's a history here of when an outsider comes in, you know, the rank and file or top staff kind of bristles a little bit, and they're like, you know, who is this new person coming in here thinking they know what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we just have to make sure that he communicates with them as much as he can, you know, with the rank and file and the command staff, and try to make that a smooth transition. And you know, again, Paris, it's only for a few months, you know, so I'm sure we can get through that part of it.
Is there, you know, LA has a lower homicide rate, much lower than Chicago. New York has a much lower homicide rate. Do you think Chicago can ever get to that level that New York and LA are seeing right now?
Honestly, I do. You know, the gains that we've made over these past 3 years, you know, in 2016, we had reached a number that we hadn't seen in 20 years. And the experts predicted that we would surpass that in 2017. Not only did we blunt it, we brought it down by 23%. So it takes time to get there, but the answer to your question, yeah, we can get there, but it has to be, again, an all-hands-on-deck approach. You know, it has to be comprehensive and a collaborative effort between not just the police department, but other city agencies and the communities that we serve.
All right, Superintendent Eddie Johnson, thank you very much, and good luck on your future endeavors when you step down at the end of the year.
Thanks, Paris. Thank you so much.
And you can catch the new WTTW digital series, Firsthand Gun Violence, on WTTW.com/firsthand. There you can also find talks with community and political leaders, stories from the guns-focused news outlet The Trace, a discussion guide, and more. And we're back with more right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Chicago's mayor is steering around some controversy over Uber today. Brandis Friedman has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Brandis.
In Paris, Mayor Lori Lightfoot today walking back charges she made yesterday aimed at ride-sharing giant Uber. At the time, she accused the company of trying to pay off black ministers in exchange for their opposition to the city's proposed ride-share tax. Uber has denied the claim and says the mayor is confusing the company's own proposal that they say would have raised $54 million for the city. Today, the mayor used the term investments instead of payoffs and says she won't allow the company to divide her from the ministers she's known and worked with.
This isn't about black ministers. This is about Uber and Lyft trying to avoid any kind of regulation and putting out a false narrative that they are somehow not responsible for the unbelievable congestion that we see every single day in the downtown area. They are. Those cars are their drivers, and they have not been regulated, and they're going to be.
And the mayor also says she's hopeful the Chicago Teachers Union votes to ratify its tentative contract agreement. Members began voting today after an 11-day walkout ended 2 weeks ago. Negotiating teams reached a deal on class sizes, staffing, pay, and making up 5 of the 11 school days missed. In order to ratify, a simple majority of members must agree during secret balloting today and tomorrow. But not all teachers are happy with the agreement. If it fails, House of Delegates has to meet again within 5 days and set a date to resume the strike. A judge will decide whether former Chicago police officer Dante Servin can have his record expunged. The 51-year-old was charged in 2013 with involuntary manslaughter for the off-duty shooting death of 22-year-old Rakia Boyd, but he was found not guilty during a 2015 trial. During a hearing today, Servin told a Cook County judge that he suffers from PTSD, is unemployed, and wants the charges off his criminal record as he searches for a job. Boyd's family called the hearing painful. The judge will announce a ruling on Tuesday. As for the weather, partly cloudy tonight with a low around 19, then mostly sunny skies tomorrow with a high near 38. Now, Paris, back to you.
Temperatures slowly creeping back up. Still to come on Chicago tonight, an apology from Northwestern student-run newspaper makes headlines of its own. A pioneer in heart health is still doing research as he turns 100. Can the Bears silence the critics when they face the LA Rams in prime time? Former Bear James Big Cat Williams previews the matchup. The development specialist behind Sesame Street's curriculum is out with a new book for parents to help their children learn. And a look at pop art from across the Americas at the Block Museum of Art. But first, some of today's top business headlines. Here's Crane's Chicago business editor, Ann Dwyer.
Thanks, Paris. Sears is cutting hundreds of corporate jobs at its Hoffman Estates headquarters and at an office in San Francisco. The layoffs come a week after the retailer announced another wave of store closures, amounting to about a third of its Sears and Kmart outposts nationwide. The online news source Business Insider says Sears cut around 300 corporate employees, though a source familiar with the situation tells Cranes that number is below 300. This comes after Sears eliminated 250 jobs in Hoffman Estates earlier this year. Meanwhile, the longtime CEO of Rush Copley Medical Center is heading for the exits. Barry Finn is retiring after 23 years at the Aurora Hospital. Under Finn's leadership, Rush Copley became part of the Rush University system in 2017. Finn's successor will be the current Chief Operating Officer, John Dieterich. And finally, Motorola is bringing back its Razr flip phone, this time as a foldable device selling at a price point of $1,500. The original Razr became a cultural icon after launching back in 2004, selling 130 million units worldwide before it was eclipsed by the 2007 launch of Apple's iPhone. Unlike other competing foldable phones, the Motorola version will instead open and close like a classic flip phone. The new model hits the market early next year. For Crane's Chicago Business and ChicagoBusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Paris.
Thanks, Ann. It was the college newspaper editorial heard round the journalism world. The editor-in-chief and other staff of the Daily Northwestern apologized for the paper's coverage of a controversial speech on campus, saying that its reporting had, quote, harmed other students. It caused a harsh backlash on social media and in newspapers across the country, excoriating the students for apologizing for doing reporting that appeared to meet journalistic standards. And joining us to talk about the incident is Beth Bennett, Associate Dean at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Professor Dean, welcome back. Professor Bennett, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
So this was a speech they were covering given by former Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Tell us about the backlash that the reporters had faced from other students for their coverage.
So I think the backlash was really around the protest around the Sessions speech. And like good journalists, the students from the Daily Northwestern covered the protest. And in doing so, took some photos, and students had a reaction to that. Students did not want their photos to be published and to be on social media. And so that was really sort of the beginning, at least of this issue. But I think for a long time, student activists have been concerned about how marginalized communities are portrayed in the media and then in the campus media. So it's not a new conversation on campus.
So there's a lot of heat the reporters were facing. So let's read a clip of the editorial that the board wrote. They said, ultimately, the Daily failed to consider our impact in our reporting surrounding Jeff Sessions. We know we hurt students that night, especially those who identify with marginalized groups. Why do you feel the editorial board felt it needed to make that apology?
So, you know, they're students and they're learning, and I think they took a lot of heat from their fellow students, and they took heat in social media. And remember, they're in a community with their fellow students. They go to class with them, they share mutual friends or see each other on campus. And so I think they really internalized the heat that they were taking and the criticisms that they were taking. And I think in that editorial, they were really speaking to other students on campus. What emerged is that they were really speaking nationally. And I think that they didn't know that. And I don't know that they considered that when they wrote the editorial.
And do you think, as a journalist, as a professor of journalism, is there a different standard on campus for a campus newspaper when you do have to consider that these are all students in a community and they do have to abide by a certain code of conduct to go to school there?
Right. So I think the first thing that is important to know is that the Daily is an independent, student-run newspaper. There's not a faculty advisor. The students are making independent decisions about their coverage. And this question about are the standards different, you know, they have to do their work in the context of being a student. I don't know that the standards are necessarily different, but the context is different. And the pressures that they feel may be different, although I start to question if this is a bit of a bellwether. The issues that we're hearing about, not just on Northwestern's campus, but on campuses nationwide about marginalized groups, being concerned about how they're represented in the media, and also being very aware that they have been represented by certain media quite poorly and really demanding change. I think that may be a bellwether for what's coming, you know, in larger formats and in larger society. So I don't know that the standards are different, but I do think that the inputs, the context that students use to make decisions, you know, that is certainly influenced by what they think, what they know in their student experience.
And to that point, the editor of the Daily Northwestern, who's African-American, Troy Clausen, he responded to all the public backlash, kind of making that point, saying, I'm an African-American editor of a newspaper. There's a different perspective here that I bring. In newsrooms across the country tend to be, unfortunately, kind of homogenous. Did he make a fair point there?
I think he did, and I think he made a fair point about campus media as well, at least at Northwestern. You know, the Daily, I think they're aware, the Daily Northwestern, that they would like to see more representation on the staff from people from different backgrounds. And so I think that they're very aware of that. And then, you know, you have to remember that on a college campus, there's a lot of discussion right now around these issues. And so there's really a heightened awareness, I think, on a college campus. But again, I think that these conversations are also happening nationwide. We just see it in a very concentrated way.
And we should mention that we did invite the editor-in-chief and other staff, and they declined our invitation. Were you surprised at the national backlash to this editorial?
Yes and no. So when I read it, I started reading the beginning of it, and I thought, oh no. And then I got to the end of it, and I looked at the comments. And you know, normally on a daily story, there might be just a few comments. And on this editorial, there were already a few hundred comments. And I knew that we were going to see some backlash. I think what's surprising to me is that these are young journalists. These are young journalists, and anyone, you know, who's come up through the journalism industry knows that there's a lot of teaching that goes on when you're a young journalist, and that young journalists make mistakes. And even when journalists come through a formal education, a formal journalism education, there's still an apprenticeship that really happens in industry. So journalists go into industry, and editors, news directors, anchors, reporters take young journalists under their wing and really bring them through and look out for them and teach them. And you can probably think of great mentors you had. I can think of great mentors I had. And so I think what surprised me is that we're really an industry that understands that we need to teach as we bring people through. And teachers know that young people make mistakes. All people make mistakes, but good educators know that making mistakes is important, and that it happens, and that you have to move on.
And it's kind of part of this social media culture where there's kind of an instant reaction to everything. You know, you mentioned the conversation about broader perspectives and context, but is there also a conversation here about a generation's perceived expectation that they shouldn't be offended, or that there should be a culture of safe spaces? I mean, is that going too far? Is that part of what happened here?
I think this is happening generationally for sure. I don't know that it's just isolated to Northwestern, and there's been a lot, certainly, of conversation around safe spaces at Northwestern and everywhere.
Certainly not a Northwestern issue, certainly a college issue.
I think this is really a broader issue. I think what's surprising to journalists who are more seasoned, I think, is that younger journalists might be more willing to offer a safe space, or might be more willing to entertain the idea of how do I make a source feel safe by, let's say, not publishing their photo. And I think, you know, we have to keep in mind that this group of students lives in a social media culture. And I think that they have a real understanding of that culture. And I also think that they, at least the students I know on the daily, they don't want to do harm. They really want to do good with their work. And so I don't blame them for wrestling with the question, is this the right tactic? Is this the right way we should do our work? I don't blame them for asking that question.
And I think that's a question that all journalists ask in perpetuity. Beth Bennett, thank you so much. And we're back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
These days, we know that eating foods high in saturated fats, salt, and cholesterol is bad and can increase our chances of having a heart attack or stroke. But that wasn't always the accepted wisdom. And the doctor whose research led to many of those discoveries spent his career in Chicago. He recently celebrated his 100th birthday and is still conducting research. Jay Shefsky has that story.
It's hard to imagine, but as recently as 1969, respected scientists were still debating whether eating right could help prevent heart disease.
Well, I would say that whatever evidence I've read does not support the view that diet is of primary importance in the genesis of atherosclerosis.
Yes, this Harvard Medical School scientist is still not convinced that diet has an impact.
That diet is one of the key factors in the contemporary epidemic, and that
arguing for a heart-healthy diet is Northwestern medicine professor Jeremiah Stamler.
Particularly the saturated fat intake, the dietary cholesterol intake.
Fat, and especially saturated fat and cholesterol.
And 50 years later, on the eve of his 100th birthday, Dr. Stamler is still preaching the gospel. As he welcomes birthday visitors, Dr. Stamler knows that he was on the right side of scientific history. In fact, much of the science was his. When he started out, he says heart disease was considered a normal part of aging. He didn't buy it.
There were people who were young who got this long before, quote, normal aging, and there were people who were old and didn't get it, so it just didn't make sense.
Dr. Stamler came to Chicago in 1947 for a research job at Michael Reese Hospital. By the late 50s, he'd moved to Northwestern, where he later founded the Department of Preventive Medicine, or Epidemiology. His early animal studies quickly pointed to the role of diet.
If you put chickens on a high-fat, high-cholesterol diet, they get blockages in their arteries just like human beings do.
Dr. Philip Greenland is a professor of preventive medicine at Northwestern. He says Dr. Stamler is widely considered the founding father of preventive cardiology.
If they gave a Nobel Prize for epidemiology, he would get the Nobel Prize in epidemiology.
It's tempting to attribute Dr. Stamler's longevity to following his own guidelines all these years. But as a scientist, he's not willing to make that leap.
What we would say as scientists, it's a good working hypothesis, except it's not testable.
At Northwestern, one of Stamler's longtime research collaborators was his wife, Rose. She died in 1998. Then he married a childhood friend, Gloria, who at 96 is still by his side. Stamler says his heart health research began as a short-term project in med school.
For a year, see if I could be productive, see if I could write a couple of papers, see if I would continue my interest.
Clearly, that year went well, and more than 70 years later, Stamler is still actively supervising research.
I haven't retired because I enjoy what I'm doing. I have fun. It's productive. It's worthwhile for other people. So at age 100, retirement is still ahead of me.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
By the way, Dr. Stamler was also influential in another area, politics. In 1965, he was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, which went after Americans suspected of communist ties. Stamler refused. Then he filed a lawsuit seeking to have the committee's mandate declared unconstitutional. That legal fight, which lasted 10 years, is widely credited with spurring Congress to disband that controversial committee. The Bears face a big test against the Los Angeles Rams this Sunday in prime time. Has the Bears offense turned the page after ending a 4-game losing streak against the limping Lions last week, or do larger problems still persist? Joining us with a preview of this matchup is James Big Cat Williams, former Bears offensive lineman. Big Cat Williams, welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the positive. It's a win, 20-13. It was a slow start, a slow finish, but there were some signs of life in that offense. Is it reason for optimism?
It was a heartbeat. I mean, that's what it about boils down to. There was a heartbeat. They started slow once again, too many 3-and-outs, didn't do well on third down conversions, but they were able to pull it off. I mean, the big question is, would they have been able to pull it off if Stafford was there? Not quite sure about that, but that's what makes you a little more nervous going into the next game.
Yeah, and Stafford or not, Trubisky had some remarkable throws. Can he just do this consistently?
That's the question. That's the question. And I think that falls on Nagy a little bit as far as calling plays that Mitch is comfortable with. You saw some things that worked well for them. You saw that, you know, the running game has the ability to open up some things, but you have to be able to use it on a regular basis. You know, just keep the guys from thinking too much. Okay, yeah, they're out there making mistakes, but, you know, is it because things are too difficult right now? And if it is, that's a problem in of itself.
Well, one of the things that's making it difficult, it seems, is the offensive line. They really appear to be struggling. How do they contain Aaron Donald and the tough Rams defensive front?
Well, it's not, I don't think it just falls on the offensive line. You know, you go back and you talk about the Detroit game as far as sacks given up. It's not just the offensive line giving up these sacks. It's maybe a misread by a back. The quarterback not turning the line the proper way. The quarterback holding on to the ball
right there.
too
It looks
long.
like he's holding on to it way too long.
Yeah, and the problem is when you run RPOs and things like that, the RPO has to be thrown right away. It has to get out of your hand right after you fake the handoff of the run. And if you hold it or you pump it, the line up front is blocking run. You know what I mean? So they're not trying to keep the guys off the quarterback at times. So, you know, it could be a wide receiver running a wrong route. Maybe he releases inside when he should have released outside.
So you're saying it's not all the line's fault here for the protection
Now, don't
problem.
get me wrong. The line has its share of it. You know, guys turning the wrong way in certain protections. You know, tackles giving up short edges as far as how deep they're pushing the defensive ends past the quarterback. So, yeah, they have their share of blame, too.
Seems like the Los Angeles Rams offense is also not the offense it was last year. What does the Bears defense have to do to contain Jared Goff?
Well, I think you're going up against an offense right now, an offensive line that is really beat up. They are going to have 3 new guys in there across the offensive line. Their center just got put on IR because he hurt his foot. But they're beat up front. They have a lot of guys that have not had an opportunity to play together. So that defensive line of the Bears, Goldman, Roy Robertson, Williams, these guys are going to have to take advantage of the adversity that the offensive line for the Rams has.
The Bears defense, you know, they only gave up 13 points, but against this backup journeyman quarterback that no one had ever heard of, seemed to be able to move the ball. Is it a case of, you know, missing Akeem Hicks there in the middle? Because it just doesn't seem like the same defense right now.
Well, I think it's everything building up. I think we've realized now how important Akeem Hicks is to that defense. But you've seen spurts from them where even with the young guys in there, and you look at Kwiatkowski, who came in last week versus Detroit and made some big impact plays, the young guys just have to step up. I mean, this is where we get back to, you get tired of hearing it, but next man up mentality, they are in that next man up mentality situation.
Speaking of next man up, Colin Kaepernick, former 49ers quarterback, is going to have a workout. The NFL is scheduling this workout. Do you believe the Bears? It doesn't seem, we don't know if the Bears are going to send someone there or not. Should the Bears be scouting him out?
I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, they have an opportunity to go out and look at a guy that was a former starting NFL quarterback. There is nothing bad that can come out of them going to see what he has the ability to do. You know, has 3 years out of the league, put that much rust on him, or, you know, you don't know what could happen. But I don't see where there's any harm in not going down and at least checking it out.
Or Coach Nagy didn't want to address it. I mean, do you do psychological harm to Mitch Trubisky? You know, that, oh, maybe I'm not the guy after all.
Well, that's the sign of a bigger problem, right? If they're not going down to look at him because they're worried about the psyche of Trubisky, that's a whole different problem in of itself that needs to be looked at and taken care of.
All right, so let's take care of your fearless prediction for this week. What do you got?
All right. Unfortunately, I'm going
This is hard for you, I know. I know, you're Homer.
But I'm going 24-13 Rams.
24-13
I just don't think that the Detroit win was enough to push them over the edge to get good things done.
All right, Big Cat Williams, we'll have to see how this shakes out in prime time. Thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you heard Big Cat's bold prediction for the game. What is yours? Let us know on our website or on social media. While you're at our website, you can read Big Cat's 3 takes to beating the Rams. And next week, Big Cat will join us to preview the Bears matchup with the New York Giants. Earlier today, Brandis Friedman sat down with a child development specialist from Sesame Street outside of our studio. Here's Brandis.
Sesame Street is one of few television shows that many people watched as children that their own children watch now as well. The puppet-based show is currently in its 50th season, and for more than 20 of those years, the show's educational curriculum has been guided by child development specialist Rosemarie Trulio. She and Sesame Workshop have just released a new book aimed at helping parents with their children's learning. It's called Sesame Street, Ready for School, a parent's guide to playful learning for children ages 2 to 5. And Rosemarie Trulio joins us now. She is Senior Vice President of Curriculum and Content at Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit that produces Sesame Street and several other shows. Thank you for joining us on Chicago Tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I just explained you're the Senior Vice President for Curriculum and Content for Sesame Workshop. Explain what you do in that role.
Sure. So Sesame Street is guided by a comprehensive whole child school readiness curriculum. So my job is to keep up with the best practices, the research. What are the critical needs for today's children, and how can we make content to address those needs? So our curriculum is constantly evolving. It's very dynamic, and it needs to, because we want to make sure that we're putting today's children on a positive trajectory and get them ready not only for school, but for life.
So what are some of the guiding principles in your mind as you're thinking about what goes into a curriculum and the content of the show?
So for instance, we used to think of the show as a show to help children learn those basic academic skills. You know, the letters and numbers. We used to say the show was brought to you by the letter A and the number 7. But we've changed our thinking to make sure that we're providing skills for children to become much more focused on how they learn. So have a positive disposition towards learning. Those skills such as what we call self-regulation and executive function skills, having children learn how to focus their attention, shift their attention, be able to control their emotions and regulate their emotions. So it's easier to then learn the content skills.
I've seen it called a research-based curriculum. What does research tell us about how children best learn?
Well, we always say that we could put the show together with all the experts, the developmental psychologists, the producers, the writers, the educators, but the real experts are the children themselves. So when we are creating stories, we go into schools and we test out our story ideas to make sure that the kids find what we're creating meaningful to them. It's engaging, because if you can't reach children, you can't teach children. So you could have this great curriculum, but if they're not willing to watch your show, you can't educate them.
So the new book is Ready for School. It's aimed at parents of young children ages 2 to 5. Why did you create this book?
I created this book because we often are telling parents what they should be doing, but who is telling them and showing them how to do it? So the other thing is to provide a resource for them and to give them a better understanding of what is developmentally appropriate, what is age appropriate, because we'll say, this activity is not for their age. So the book provides what we call these age progressions. So for all of the skills, so the book is divided by these content areas. Yes, there are chapters on literacy and math, but there are chapters on social emotional learning and health and the arts. And to break it down, to let parents understand, well, this is an activity I could do that is appropriate for my 2-year-old. These are the skills that they should be learning right now. Not to look at, I have a 2-year-old and let's see, is my child more like a 4-year-old? That is the opposite of what I want the book to do, because that is then adding all of the extra stress and pressure that we're seeing in the lives of kids, which is another reason for wanting to write this book, to bring back that sense of wonder in early childhood. Everyone needs to slow down a little bit. Children need the space to play. And for me to help parents have a better understanding how they could guide their children's play, because children learn best through play. Children learn best through parent-child interactions. So it's a how-to book.
You mentioned the stress and pressure that modern children are under. Are they under too much? Are we putting too much pressure on them? Test scores at school, where's this pressure coming from?
It is coming from us. You know, they're not born into this world and feeling this sense of pressure and anxiety. They're picking up on our stressors. There was a kindergarten teacher who advised us in a curriculum seminar that we should be spilling milk. Well, why are we spilling milk? Well, you're spilling because you need to show children what happens when you make a mistake. Because we want children to embrace these mistakes. And so there's lots of oops and ahas in this book. You know, oops, I made a mistake, but this is what I've learned through that mistake. Because when we talk about parenting, there is no such thing as perfect parenting. We all want what's best for our children, and we're all doing our best. But we need some guides, and we need some resources to help us. But when we make a mistake, it's okay. We need to learn these resiliency skills. Our children need a toolbox of resiliency skills so that when they are faced with challenges, they don't fall apart. They persevere and they realize, I'm going to learn something and I'm going to take this new information and try something else.
And in that vein, Sesame Street's theme this year is that, you know, failure is not always a bad thing.
The power of possibilities.
How did you arrive at this, you know, being what kids and parents need to hear right now?
Well, because part of our process, it takes us about a year to 18 months to prepare for production. And we bring in experts. And so for the 50th anniversary, I wanted to do something different. I really wanted to acknowledge our great work over the past 50 years, but I wanted to look forward. What else should we be focusing on, especially when we're dealing with early childhood education issues for today's children? And I brought in thought leaders across all disciplines, and I asked them basically the state of the union of children today. What keeps you up at night? And they did talk about the stress and the pressure and the rising rates of anxiety among children, and how we need to calm down and really connect with our children, but more importantly, give them the resiliency skills. And what better way of doing that than through play? Because when you're playing, you're interacting with each other. It's very social, and there are conflicts that come up, and how do you resolve these conflicts? So the skills that we need to learn, not only prepare children for kindergarten, but for life, is through play.
A lot to learn for parents too. Rosemary Trulio, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And again, the book is called Sesame Street, Ready for School, A Parent's Guide to Playful Learning for Children ages 2 to 5. You can preview the book on our website.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Pop art gets reframed in a museum show that looks at the visual culture of the 1960s and 70s and sheds light on an entire hemisphere of artwork that really pops. We recently brought you a look at a groundbreaking art exhibit with some swinging psychedelic visuals from across Latin America. Here's another visit. It's called Pop America, with an accent on the E. Artworks from South America, Central America, North America, and the Caribbean share the spotlight on campus at Northwestern University. Enter the Block Museum of Art, and you're greeted by a colorful self-portrait by Rubens Gershman of Brazil. And there's art by Carlos Irizarry of Puerto Rico, Felipe Ehrenberg of Mexico, and a sculpture by Marisol, a French artist of Venezuelan heritage.
There have been a couple of re-examinations of pop art that look at pop art in a more global perspective, but this is really the first one that focuses on Latin America and also in dialogue with artists in the United States.
Among the U.S. artists featured here are Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol.
We have this default notion of pop art as something that happens out of New York, but there are artists working in other countries who are responding to the pop idiom and pop visual language and using things like comic books as an inspiration, mass media, consumer products, and advertising.
Works include fashion, graphic design, and large-scale sculpture. There is even a bed used as a canvas.
Pop artists were interested in kind of redefining art around things that were familiar to us. So everyday products like a Coke bottle or a Campbell's soup can. And they bring these elements into their art and make them very bold, and it gets us thinking about art in a different way. Art that's not about a painter working alone, furiously in a studio, but having art that's drawn from our everyday reality.
Some of the artwork lands somewhere between Peter Rabbit and Peter Max, the psychedelic artist. But it isn't all just for fun.
Pop is thought of as very playful, very superficial or surface-oriented, and it is that, but then there are these deeper levels and sometimes more political meanings that are coming through in many of the works in the exhibition.
The exhibition was co-organized by the McNay Art Museum in San Antonio and the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University. At Northwestern, it takes up nearly 2 floors of the museum.
It reframes pop art and gets us thinking about not just what was happening in New York or London, but also looking across the Americas, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, getting us to think more broadly about what America means. It feels very relevant for now, and I think the broader topic of looking beyond the United States and this kind of modernism that develops in a different place is very much on the forefront of people who are thinking about histories of art and histories of culture.
The exhibition is called Pop America, 1965 to 1975. It is at the Block Museum of Art on Northwestern University's campus in Evanston through December 8th. The museum is free and open to the public. There's more to see on our website. And that is our show for this Thursday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. We leave you with a glimpse of the Museum of Science and Industry's annual Christmas Around the World and Holidays of Light exhibit. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.